Hi, I'm Jerri Hyde, Youth Services Manager at the Ames Public Library. Welcome to Well Read, a special program about the 2014 Best Books of the Year, according to the Youth Services librarians anyway. So, shh, we have a plan, and that plan is to share with you some of the best books. I'm going to begin with one, because an excerpt from one, because it talks about the reader. That's you, that's me, that's the young girl or the young boy that comes into the library, or that's in the school classroom, or in your house. Let's read. The reader. When we can't find my sister, we know she's under the kitchen table, a book in her hand, a glass of milk, and a small bowl of peanuts beside her. We know we can call Odella's name out loud, slap the table hard with our hands, dance around it singing, "She'll be coming around the mountain." So many times the song makes us sick and the circling makes us dizzy. And still, my sister will do nothing more than slowly turn the page. Brown Girl Dreaming by Jacqueline Woodson. Now, I know several of us have read this story or this book, the little different excerpts of thoughts and history of our author. Does anyone like to share some of their thoughts about this particular story?
Well, I thought this was a really beautiful memoir, not only because her free verse was just so stunning. For those of us who didn't know that Jacqueline Woodson could write poetry, you definitely know after reading this book. But it's also a really great picture of somebody who's caught in between, sort of caught between the civil rights movements, 1960s and 1970s. You know, the civil rights movement has happened, and it's sort of like what happens after that. And then it's also, she's caught in between the North and the South, because she's partly living in Ohio and partly living in the South in South Carolina. And it's also that age where you're caught in between. And so it's a really beautiful portrait of that. And one of my favorite parts was, because it's also a story of a writer coming to be, there's a really great moment where she's in probably, middle grade, 5th or 6th grade, and she goes into the library and she finds a picture book. And obviously this is not the level of her reading, and yet she finds her first picture book with an African-American girl in it. And she was so astounded that this could even happen, that there could be an African-American character just like her in a book, that it changed her entire life. And it's an absolutely beautiful passage.
Yeah, and that multicultural type of illustrations in our picture books, we were talking about that earlier too, is so very important. Mm-hmm. I know as someone that presents story times, you can see in the audience when they can identify with themselves in that illustration. So it does make a difference, and it's very important that we include everyone in our society in our stories. It isn't all about just us. It's about everyone, the everyman type of syndrome. So, any other, Danielle? I know
I loved it. I don't know. I could just say it about 20 times. It was very.
Do you think people should read this book?
I do. I do think everyone should read this one. I think it's a beautiful story. The thing that really stuck with me is that Jacqueline Woodson wasn't that great at reading, and she wasn't that great at school. And I think that's a really important thing for, again, children being able to see themselves, is that she didn't, she didn't start off the bat. She didn't teach herself to read when she was 3. She didn't write her first poem when she was, 18 months old. So but she loved it. And so
she's quite an accomplished writer.
Oh, definitely.
And, it was very surprising to hear that she didn't like to read. But when I was reviewing it, and I could think of a good dozen or so kids that I think would really enjoy this story and identify with it, not just enjoy it. I mean, it isn't a fictional piece that you just sit and read, and it's a thoughtful piece that it it's like you said, lyrical, and it rings a bell, so you can really identify with the different passages, and some of the things that happen are just like, you just can't believe, happen. So very interesting, and I kind of believe, I don't know if, I know that the word out there is that this is a good Newbery candidate, so I'm anxious to see whether or not, should we all four predict that?
Well, and it did win the National Book Award, so
I mean, it's
other
already-
people think very highly of it as well.
It's not just us.
Yes.
It's actually a great book. So who would like to start?
Well, I guess I could go on. This one's going to a completely different way with The Princess in Black.
Princess in Black. Yes, kind of a different type of look.
So this is by Shannon Hale and Dean Hale, and illustrated by one of our favorite illustrators, Leon Pham. And it is an early chapter book. So it's one of those great books for those kids who are just starting chapter books. And it's about a princess. And this princess lives in a world, and princesses do not wear black. But this particular princess lives very close to where monsters also live. So when she hears a monster alarm, for example, when this shepherd boy, his goats are attacked by monsters, she says, "Help!" And in the distance, a pony neighs. And so this princess has to put on her outfit, and she has to run to save it, but at the same time, this very straight-laced duchess is back at her castle taking tea and just trying to find something wrong with this princess because everything is too perfect. So it just, there's that Duchess Wig Tower.
I wonder where they got that name at.
But so she goes through and she fights, but at the same time, she's wearing her tiara and she's doing both these things, so it's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's just a fun book.
It looks very, very much an easy read or an attractive read for those beginning to read in the early chapterhood stage. Some people, if you like Bink and Golly,
Yeah,
you'll probably
definitely.
like this one as well.
Or Mercy Watson. It looks
Yeah,
very
Mercy
similar
Watson.
stage to Mercy Watson.
And then, I have heard stories from several librarians out in the world where some of their patrons have come in dressed like the Princess in Black. So I think it's another good superhero.
Wonder if this is a good costume thing for
Maybe for
Princess in Black. That's
Halloween next year, one of us can be the Princess in Black, and one of us can be the Princess in Black before she.
Can I be the Wig Tower?
Yes.
awesome. Such fun that we have with our stories. Yes. And how about this? I know several of us have also read the Under the Egg, and this was very reminiscent of some books that I read as a child.
Yeah.
Anyone want to talk to that?
Yeah, it's very much sort of, somebody is billing it as a cross between the Mixed Up Files of Basil Lee Frankweiler and Chasing Vermeer, which it very much has a lot of those same elements. It's a mystery. It sort of dips back into history a little bit, so it's sort of historical fiction, and it's just a really fantastic story about this girl whose grandfather's dying words to her were "Look under the egg," and when he dies, he leaves her and her mother in sort of dire straits. They've got the house, but they're surviving off the chickens in the garden, and the girl really takes care of the mother, who's sort of absent-minded professor type, and they have $348 to live on at this point. And so she's trying to decode this "look under the egg" that her grandfather told her, and it leads her on this this string of sort of adventures and clues to try to figure out exactly what it was. And it was just so well written. The characters were so captivating, and it was just really like a page turner. I really enjoyed this one.
Yeah, and she really grows up. It takes place basically over the course of a summer. So she really comes into her own and meets a friend of her own age, which as far as we can tell she hasn't had before, and they kind of have different ways of approaching things and have to work it out. So it's also a classic coming of age type novel. And I think it would be great for our like 3rd, 4th, 5th graders that are reading up, because it's very complex, and they would appreciate the mystery and the history. And it's a slower pace, so it's going to be best appreciated, I think, by a stronger reader who can really like keep going. But like thematically, it would really work for those younger kids. So yeah, I appreciated that. And a lot of the little details, like it talks about what she wears, and a lot of what she wears is things from her grandma's chest in the attic. So she's like, well, it's my grandma's slip, but doesn't it look like just a, suave dress? And her friend is like, no, it looks like you're wearing underwear. Wow. So there's just a lot of little funny details in it too that I appreciate.
And I understand there's a punk rock librarian in there too.
Yes.
So
yes, he's pretty
we're
hilarious.
represented well.
You can't go wrong with a book with a punk rock
That's right.
librarian.
That's right. So Under the Egg by Laura Marks Fitzgerald. Now I should have transitioned the Princess Black with Violet Mackerel's Pocket Protest, just because it's about the same age. So I kind of jumped up and back and forth. But Violet is one of my favorite characters too. And she has a purpose in this particular story. She's saving the tree.
She is determined that that tree is not going to go down. Yeah, she and her friend go to the park one day and notice that there's a sign that says Johnson's tree removal. This tree will be taken down on a specific day, and they get very, very sad because they really like the park. And so they decide that they're going to do something, and they think about doing a big petition or doing a lot of sign protests, and then they finally decide to do a small protest, which is why it's called a pocket protest. And they write little truths about the tree and about nature and about the park and tuck them inside of acorns, because they believe that the people who care about the tree would care enough to notice notes in the acorns. And so it's a beautiful story about nature and about their friendship and also their families. What I really like about Violet Mackerel is she has a very realistic family. Her parents, the people who are her parents now, it's her mom and a stepdad, but they're very loving and they have worked it out, and their neighbor is quite different, but they make it work. So it's true to the fact that there's lots of different things that happen in the world, but optimistic that it can all come together. That's my favorite part.
And I agree with you as far as the family. So many times, everybody's died, and these poor children are left alone, and they have to do this and solve the world. And she's trying to solve the world, some of the problems and what she believes in. But there's some happiness that she has a family, and that she
and a lot of support from her parents.
And you can get that support in many ways, not just from a traditional nuclear family, but I like again, there's many children that I can think of that this would be just a fabulous, I wish there was a boy counterpart to Violet, that there was so we could hand this to some of the boys that I think would really enjoy it. We know girls will read everything. Right. The boys always like to have a main character that's a guy for whatever reason. So
would you say Alvin Ho would be?
I would give Alvin Ho to kids that
like
kind of the family stories.
Yeah.
So Violet Mackerel Pocket Protest by Anna Branford. So now we can go ahead and go to the next choice of each of yours.
We still in J fiction?
Yes, still in J fiction.
I'm going to jump in with the League of Seven.
I wondered if you wouldn't go.
All right. So this one is very exciting, and it's also steampunk, and it's great for those. So steampunk is kind of alternate history, as if steam were the power behind things. So instead of electricity, and in fact, Thomas Edison is one of the villains of this book, because in this book, the main character has been raised by his parents who are Septembrists, and they are people, parts of the society that know that every so often the Mangleborns come back. and really take over the world. And they're these monsters. And in this world, his parents are pretty sure that things are going wrong already because Europe hasn't been heard from in years. And whenever people have like taken a ship to Europe, or not even a ship, I believe they take submarines to Europe, they've never come back. And what's also cool is it's also alternate history in that the Native Americans are a much bigger part. Then there's the Yankees, so that's like people of the North. And so it's a very interesting alternate history, and I think a lot of kids like to see that, what could it have been like, what could have happened. So the main character ends up teaming up with two other characters when his parents get possessed and taken over, and so they're trying to figure it out. And sorry, there's a lot going on in this book, is what I'm trying to say. There's a ton going on. Basically, it's very exciting, and the main character and his two friends, turns out that they might be the start of a new League of Seven, which are these 7 heroes that come back every time the Mangleborns rise.
Is it safe to say that this is one of the first juvenile steampunk? Most of the steampunk
I would say
been
most
in
of the
YA?
steampunk is in YA, and so it's a
this
really
is,
great one, and it's got these kids with superpowers,
Right.
and they're gonna take over.
And if the cover doesn't get them, I mean, I don't know
Yeah,
what will
what
get people
will?
to pick it up. It's a gorgeous cover.
So that's a nice little transition into covers, and just a kind of a segment, a segue into the Nancy Drew stories. That not new books, but new books. In the fact that it's got a new cover on it and wonderful illustrations on it that kind of brings it to today's time. Again, the story is the same. So you, Nancy Drew lover, mom and dads and grandpas and grandmas, just suggest one of these to your grandchildren or your children, and I bet they'll start becoming Nancy Drew lovers as well.
So much more attractive than
Very,
this.
very nice done.
It's a
Nicely
great gift
done.
book.
So Danielle, I know you have a story with 2 A's on it.
Yes, absolutely almost. And this is by Lisa Graff. Unfortunately, it's not, I don't think, the most attractive cover. And so I'm a little afraid that it's going to be sort of the biggest overlooked book of the year, but it was absolutely one of my favorites. It's a story about Albie, and Albie is just not bright. And it's a really interesting, she creates a really interesting character because a lot of times when people think, oh, he's not bright, well, he's just not really good at something, or, maybe he's dyslexic or all that. And there are all these sort of excuses around it. And the author in one of her interviews says, no, he's just not a bright kid. But he has the biggest heart, and he is just so lovable. One of the things that he does is he's always trying to do math really well in his head. And every Tuesday night, I think, his parents get Chinese takeout. And it's always his job to pay the delivery boy. And he always tries to do the change in his head. And he's very sweet. Sometimes he'll give the delivery boy a $9 tip. Sometimes he'll give him a 40-cent tip. And he doesn't usually pick up on it until they're at dinner and he's sort of, surreptitiously just sort of trying to do the math without anybody knowing, and then he's like, oh no. So he's a very sweet boy, and it's a wonderful story about how he has, he has a great relationship with his parents, but his parents, although they obviously love him very much, they don't know how to love him in the right way. They have huge expectations for him that Albie is just never going to meet. And so it's sort of a story of both how his parents learn to accept him and how he learns to accept himself. In one portion, he's sort of describing himself, although indirectly, as a superpower that just doesn't have, or a superhero that doesn't have any superpowers. He just can't do anything special. He doesn't have any talents. He doesn't have any gifts. So I really, really highly recommend this book for anybody who's ever not felt smart enough, who's anybody who's never felt like they're not talented, they're not special, who's just not felt good enough in some way, this is a wonderful, wonderful feel-good story. And I highly urge us to get it into as many hands as possible, because it's probably not going to be picked up off the shelf by the cover.
And
So this is a kid who, it's not that he's not smart, but oh, he's so athletic, or
Yes.
oh, he's like just has this artistic ability. It's like, no, really, like nowhere am I shining.
Exactly.
Because often we see in books, well, she didn't have this, but she had this, and this is what she learned to live for. And
Yes.
And so this child is more normal than the rest of our book characters are.
Absolutely.
I
And
mean,
that's
that's what
why-
real life is all about.
Right,
Yes.
and that's why I think so many children will be able to relate to him. And I think it's, and even if even if you are a kid who's in the top of your class, this is a story that you should still read, because you need to understand what it's like for somebody else who isn't. And it's a really great way to build empathy with other kids, and it's just a fabulous story.
Sounds wonderful.
And I highly recommend the audiobook. There's a great interview at the end with the author.
So, and audiobooks, many of the books that we are talking about that you can read, you can also listen to as well, because we tried to purchase some of the audiobooks. We're going to go ahead and jump from the juvenile fiction and the early chapter and the chapter books in the independent reader to what we call our graphic novels. And I'm going to pull out El Delfo by C.C. Bell. And Danielle, would you like to share what you've read about this one?
So this is a fantastic story, and it's based on C.C. Bell's true life, except she's not a rabbit. I'm pretty sure.
Does she fly around like this?
I didn't see that mentioned in any of the interviews. But it's based on her true story. When she was 4, she had meningitis, and so she lost, I believe, almost all of her hearing there. And so it's about Cece's journey through life, and Cece never learned sign language, and looking back in the interviews she's done, she's very upset about this, that she wishes she would have. However, and this is in the book as well, her mom tries to take her to classes, and it's just one more thing that she feels different about. So she refuses to learn. So what Cece has are hearing aids, and she also has a microphone that she gives to all her teachers. So that's how she hears. So
she wears a box that
and-
helps amplify that. And
and-
I'm trying to find that picture for us.
So she's got this, that she feels that is her superpower, talking about the superpowers. So the big thing in it is that she can hear the teachers anywhere in the building. So if they go if they forget to turn it off and they go into the teacher's lounge, she can hear that. The big thing that I think a lot of kids are going to be very amused by is that she can hear them go to the bathroom sometimes.
There's a picture of her box that she carries around.
And so she feels like that's what her superpower is. But not only does it talk about her, the other big thing in this book is friendship. And it's all about Cece trying to make friends. And just like a lot of kids, Cece Bell had some issues with making some good friends growing up. And it's a lot about how she struggles, but it's also about how she succeeds. And so it's just a fantastic read.
So El Delfo by C.C. Bell, a wonderful story. Again, talking about some of our when we're not all the same, where we don't all have wonderful talents that can go here and there, and fictional characters, but real life type of things. Talking about real life, here's Hidden by Louis Andalville.
So this book is probably the best example that I've seen of a graphic novel that tells about history and that can teach children about history. I guess personally I knew quite a bit about the Holocaust, so I didn't feel like I learned something from it, but there's a lot of information packed in there, and it's very much appropriate for young children, because young children do need to start to understand that terrible things have happened in history. And this page here is about where the narrator of the book has to start wearing the Star of David. And her dad had told her family that they were going to be a super band of sheriffs. And so that's why they needed to wear it. And then she goes to school, and you can see the kids' expressions. And what happens at school, she realizes this is not the truth. But what we learn more about how she felt from looking at her face and the other kids' faces than we do from the text. You can see there's very, very spare text on the page. The frame of the story is the narrator, who's in this picture here, grew up. She was a child during the Holocaust, and she was taken away and hidden for a while to stay safe, and that's why it's called Hidden. It actually was written in French and was called L'Enfant Caché, which means the hidden child. And so it's her story. And then the frame of the story is that she is a grandmother thinking about these things in the night, and her 3 or 4-year-old granddaughter comes down the stairs and says, "I had a nightmare, Grandma. Did you too? Is that why you're awake?" And she said, "Well, kind of." And then she said, "Well, Mom tells me to tell her about my nightmares, then it makes me feel better. Why don't you tell me about it?" And so for the first time, the grandma shares all of what happened to her as a child. And then it broadens out, and she talks to her child as well. The most impactful page for me was that next one where after the war is over and the child has been safe and she's now trying to put her life back together, they found her mother. And when she goes in to see her mother, this is what her mother looks like to her. And I tried to write out what you would say. Then it might be something like this. My mother looked very tiny, but her head looked very huge. They had shaved almost all of her hair. Her eyes looked distant, like she was confused, and her body was tiny and starving. And none of those words are on that page. But you can get every single bit of information from that picture. So that is what I am so excited about, how graphic novels are becoming more popular, because I think it will make history and biology, and I've read some physics in graphic novels, and I've learned a lot from that format. So
a wonderful story that is very
Definitely.
touching. I mean, it combines those pictures with feelings and the words as well. So all readers can take that in. A very, very moving story. And so we're going to go ahead and move on over to our nonfiction, in which we also have some moving historical type of things happening. And this is Separate is Never Equal.
And this was my top rated book for the whole year. So everyone knows about Brown versus the Board of Education. Everyone knows about African American integration of schools. But what you don't hear a lot about is that basically the same story played out in California years earlier with the Hispanic people in that area. And this is a very true story. The author interviewed Sylvia herself, and she told about her experience. And her family was all American citizens. She spoke perfect English, but when they moved to this town and they looked at the school and they went into the school, they said, "You cannot register in this school because you're Hispanic and you need to," well, I'm pretty sure they said Mexican, "you need to register to the Mexican school down the road." And when they went and looked, this is what the Mexican school was like. It was right next to a dairy farm, so there was lots of cows and manure and flies and an electric fence that separated the farm from their school. They had no playground. All they had was dirt. And it was really, really quite a bad situation. So their family spent years and lots of time and lots of money to fight this in court, and eventually got the right for everyone to attend the regular school. And there was some very interesting things about it, that the dad was the one who really did a lot of the court cases because he was a businessman, and so the mom had to run their farm. And the way it starts is Sylvia is in the new school, and kids are denigrating her, like insulting her and stuff. And she comes home and she's like, "Mom, I don't want to go back to that school." And her mom reminds her that this is what they have been fighting for. But that, like, starting it that way helps everyone to understand, oh yes, like, we've all felt that way, but we need to, like, push forward. So, yeah, and the art is amazing as well. So another example of integrating art and history and facts.
Separate is never equal. I'm going to go to a completely opposite thing, and how about sharks? Neighborhood sharks, really awesome.
Yes, I loved this book. So this is Neighborhood Sharks by Catherine Roy, and it is talking about the Farallon Islands, which are about 30 miles from San Francisco. And it's one of the hunting grounds of the great white. So so she uses this beautiful artwork to show how great whites hunt and how wonderful they are at hunting. And can you this is not going to be a hard sell for a lot of kids. It's just fantastic. Look at that blood in the water, guys.
Amazing.
And somehow she made it beautiful. But she also goes then after these, she goes into what makes the great whites so fantastic at hunting. For example, this part here is all about how I did not know that great whites basically act like warm-blooded fish. Their bodies, although they're cold-blooded, their bodies are set up so that the blood gets pumped enough and moved enough that they act more like whales or dolphins or something like that. So how their vision. So she puts together why they're such perfect hunting machines. They're this apex predator, the projectile jaws. And she also talks about what scientists are doing to study great whites. Because look at this, this is a piece of carpet that they put out there that they can judge what they do. And they're tagging the other really cool thing that they taught, they name these sharks. They don't just give them numbers. There are so few great whites and they come back so regularly that they just give them names. Every year, this one named Tom breaks a record because it comes back every year. So, and there's so much we don't know about sharks. They've never seen a great white give birth. They have no idea where it happens even.
Wow.
Interesting.
And I know our author went and studied them and watched them tag them and actually lived the scientist side of it.
And there's some great pictures online. So it was just a fantastic read. I learned a lot about sharks.
And again, it kind of combines that picture book type of look with lots and lots of very informative information.
And she also throws in a little conservation in there. She's like, well, great whites haven't really changed very much in them, ever. But, who's to say they can keep doing what they're doing with what humans are doing to the world?
Right.
So we're going to close with one last book, and again, kind of all over the place here as far as topics are concerned, but we're going to historically go back to Thomas Jefferson, Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Everything, and talk about this really wonderful character, but yet we have some flaws as well.
Yes, and that's what I really love about this book is Myra Coleman clearly loves history. She loves presidents. She loves learning about them, and she loves sharing that love too. And so she makes her books really fascinating. This one, and she wrote another one about Lincoln, and her pictures are gorgeous. Her own writing, her own font, I guess, is just so unique that it just makes it so captivating. And the other thing is she puts in really great little quips in there, like Thomas Jefferson had freckles, 20, I think. And fun things like that kids would really enjoy, that makes reading about history a lot of fun. But like this page, she doesn't gloss over his flaws. She talks about the fact that, he's fighting for independence, but at the same time, he is holding slaves. And clearly that's not a good thing. And we get to Sally Hemings, which a lot of children's books just completely bypass. And she has this beautiful page where she talks about the beautiful Sally Hemings and about how Thomas Jefferson had a relationship with her. And then she talks about African Americans who passed as white, and about how passing is a really sad thing. It's a terrible thing to have to do. And so she sort of has a lot packed into a pretty small book, and it's a very honest kind of warts and all, but it's still a beautiful book, portrait of Jefferson.
And it never goes over children's heads, you know?
Right.
Like all it says in that page is, it is strongly believed that some of Sally Hemings's children were also Thomas Jefferson's. That's as in deep detail as it gets, but that's enough for some really great discussion with children. And yeah, it's one of my favorites as well this year.
So going off on that, my mom has always said that if a good book makes you want to go and read 2 or 3 other books. And I think all of these books that we talked about today have been books that you want to go and find out something more, and something more about this, or find something more about myself, you know, in all these. And so that's what books do. Books bring to life different things, different characteristics, different historical events, or different lifelong type of things that are happening, whether they're white sharks or Thomas Jefferson. So we still have a plan, and we'll continue on with that plan in a few minutes. So thank you for watching.